They left the room the way the ocean leaves a shell, hollowed out, salt-dusted, whistling with what it used to contain. The yellowed tape still sagged across the doorway like a tired eyelid. Dust leaned on everything: the crooked lamp, the cracked Floridian map on the wall, the motel air conditioning unit that rattled once, then surrendered to silence. Time had not moved so much as settled. A moth flared near the window and fell, and the investigator, who had once stepped through this room with younger shoes and sharper certainty, paused on the threshold and felt his breath count out the distance between the living and the dead. August 12, 1976, Palmetto Key, Florida, a small town stunted by its own sunshine. The case had been left in a cabinet that sounded like a cough when you opened it. The Vega case, victim Marisol Elena Vega, age 24. Cuban-American. Waitress at the Sea Grapes Diner off Route 41. Student after dark English literature at the community college. Notebook margins full of words she liked the feel of. Salt, hush, ache. Found in a room at the Sun-Ray Motel, room 2B. The one with a flickering vacancy sign looping its promise to no one. There had been no suspect, only a short list of people who had passed through her orbit like indifferent weather. A manager who tipped in nickels, a married mechanic who left at odd hours, a teacher who wrote too many comments on her essays in a slanted, urgent hand. Detective Arthur Rook had been younger then. His jacket fit differently. His hair had not made its slow exit. He remembered the room through the old photographs. The motel bed with its orange bedspread that always looked damp in pictures, the ashtray crowding itself with anonymous butts, the Gideon Bible open to an equation of names he never solved. Marisol's body had lain on the floor, half out of the frame in those early shots, a smear of a life interrupted. The coroner called it blunt force trauma to the back of the head. A chipped paperweight, glass, with an air bubble like a frozen breath inside, had been found beneath the dresser, reddish-brown at its base. The paperweight was the wrong kind of heavy, like grief. The case file had its own sound when you lifted it, a hush of affidavits, crime scene photos that clicked against each other in their plastic sleeves, cassette tapes with faded labels that looked like they were forgetting their own names. Rook had taken them home more than once in the years since, set them on his kitchen table like guests he didn't know how to feed. He had said, in that private voice men use when they're lying to themselves, there was nothing there, nothing left to take apart. The best he could do was keep the promise bureaucrats are paid to keep, preserve, maintain, do not disturb. But cases like this never really sleep. They breathe behind walls, they change shape in the dark. Rook could feel the old shapes returning as he stepped into 2B again, 30 years after the original investigation, and long after the motel had surrendered itself to weed and mildew. The place had been condemned, but the bones were the same. The vacancy sign outside still hung askew, its neon long dead, the metal letters pockmarked by salt air. The scent was distinct and low, dust, damp sheetrock, the sweet, stale aftersmell of motel soap. Somewhere a highway hummed like a palm pressed against a wound. It had always sounded like that. He stood at the window and watched the parking lot's heat-warped memory. A blue gremlin with a cracked windshield, a motorcycle with a sunburnt seat, a patrol car that made every passerby assume guilt as a weather condition. He saw himself in reverse, moving like a man through syrup. He saw Marisol, the only daughter of a seamstress who ironed punishment into collars, a girl who saved tips in coffee tins. Her last hours were as ordinary as cheap ice. She had come here because someone wanted to talk in private, and she believed that private could still mean safe. In the photographs, her lipstick was the color of a thought left unfinished. Rook, someone had said a lifetime ago, "You're starring." "Just thinking," he had answered. About what? He had hesitated, about how even silence tastes like something. Older Rook, this one, did not let himself remember the rest. It was too slick with the oil of hindsight. He catalogued instead. The sightlines, the door latch scored as if by a nervous key, the faint scrape mark under the telephone where a cord used to coil. The small fridge wore a strip of tape like an old scar. He knelt and tested the give of the carpet. There was still a darker patch near the dresser, as if color had never recovered there. He breathed. He did not call it guilt. He called it weight. Marisol had been found with her right hand curled as if she'd been holding a word that evaporated on her way down. No struggle marks, no defensive wounds that made sense with the trajectory of the blow. The coroner's diagrams were delicate, as if drawn by someone worried about hurting the body a second time. On the bedside table, a Polaroid had been developed wrong. Too bright, losing the edges, a window swallowed by glare. They'd filed it as ambient, a thing not helpful. Rook remembered the way he'd shoved that photo back into the sleeve in 1976, annoyed by its refusal to tell him anything. He remembered the certainty that had kept his eyes small. Back then he had gone home after the second week and found the ocean louder than usual. He'd sat on his porch and smoked and thought of the sea as an unsolved witness that never answered the subpoena. He had promised himself one small thing, to visit the victim's mother once the case had a face attached to the noise. That visit never happened. The mother moved north. The file thickened. The town kept sleeping. Now in the dead motel, Rook pressed a hand against the wall where the headboard had once been. He felt for studs, for irregularities, for the sensation of something human having hidden something human a long time ago. He stepped back. The moth on the sill lifted itself and failed again. Outside, a gull split the heat with its beak. He spoke to no one. Marisol Vega, he said. He gave the syllables air because the file had reduced her to initials and case numbers long ago. 24, daughter, student, waitress. He paused, then added a confession made meaningless by time. I should have done better. The room held his voice and then let it go, the way a tide lets go of a cigarette butt. Everything that mattered went quiet again. The unsolved are not loud. They settle in your bones and whisper, and the whisper is a metronome. Rook stayed until the light changed, until the room moved a degree from blue to gray, and then he left the way people leave a church, not improved but arranged. The case waited. He carried it out. 2. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. It began with a storage purge, the bureaucratic cousin of an exorcism. The evidence room, prone to condensation and forgetfulness, had finally been granted new shelving. A young clerk, the kind who treats labels like liturgy, had opened box 14C Vega, ME, and found a sealed manila envelope that was not on the inventory sheet. The envelope was light and stiff. On the front, in the handwriting of a former property officer named Klein, was written, Polaroid, redevelop. The question mark had teeth. The clerk carried it to her supervisor, who carried it up the stairs like a frail animal. Rook, who had a reputation for remembering the wrong cases the longest, was called in. Inside, the overexposed Polaroid from room 2B, a small roll of undeveloped 110 film in a plastic canister, and a typed note clipped with a rust-brown paperclip. The note read, found behind baseboard during second scene sweep 8/1876. Light damage. Consider redeveloping. Budget constraints hold. Klein, who drank before budgets got cut, had died in 1989. The film somehow had not. We can't process here, the supervisor said, which was true. We can send it out. Send it, Rook said. He heard the word leave with a clean edge. He didn't let himself think about what might be on it. In detective work, hope is flammable. You keep it in another room. They chose a lab that specialized in neglected film, the kind of place that made small miracles and larger disappointments. The technician, a precise woman with hands that looked like they had never hurried, called 2 days later. You're in luck, she said, her tone refusing drama. The film had 3 exposures salvageable, dust artifacts but legible. Legible, Rook repeated, tasting the word. Send them encrypted, and the Polaroid any chance. The Polaroid was overfixed originally, she said, like a doctor rehearsing bad news for someone else. But sometimes the early layer preserves a ghost. We used a low-angle scan. There's an impression. What kind of impression? A reflection, she said. You'll see. The files arrived with a hush like breath before speech. Rook clicked them open at his desk after closing his door. The office felt like a tin can in heat. His wall fan whispered its impotent syllables. He let the first image load. A close-up of the motel dresser surface, grainy, the light washed toward one corner. Along the edge of the frame, a thumb, someone. And in the glass of the motel's cracked mirror, a reflection that wasn't a face but a fragment of neon. VACAY, the letters yawning in incomplete promise. The second image showed the bedside table, the Bible open, a pen, a matchbook from C. Grape's Diner, its scalloped logo. The third image was the Polaroid redeveloped. The window of room 2B nearly all glare, but at the bottom right, a strip of the parking lot, and in the chrome bumper of a parked car, a reflected shape that resolved on magnification into a shoe and the hem of trousers with a distinctive cuff, 2 parallel stitches, and a frayed thread hanging like a question mark. Rook did not allow himself to be impressed. He allowed himself to be scheduled. He printed the images, laid them next to the original case photos. The vacancy sign had been repaired sometime after the murder. He remembered a time-stamped maintenance report somewhere in the municipal files about the Sun-Ray's sign losing letters in a storm. The cuff. He'd noted a cuff once, in a witness interview that hadn't felt like a lead, belonging to a man who laughed with his throat closed. The matchbook, well, that was a circle that went nowhere. Everyone in Palmetto Key had at some point passed a matchbook from C. Grapes through their laundry. He took the images down the hall to the digital forensics kid, who had shaved patience into his beard. Can you clean the reflection edges, without inventing things that aren't there? I can keep it honest, the kid said, and did. The neon fragment revealed a hairline crack running between A and C, ricocheting from memory like a tossed coin. An old service request surfaced in Rook's mind. A landlord complaining about a sign whose cracked segment was cutting current and raising the electric bill, filed in October 1976. If the reflection showed the crack, then the photo was made post-crack. The murder had been August 12. Someone had been in that room after the cleanup, recreating angles, capturing details. Or someone had used an older camera to photograph a subsequent scene. Why? He turned the notion like a key that might fit another lock. Also, the forensics kid said, pointing with a capped pen, see the shoe. There's a scuff on the instep, crescent-shaped, consistent with old-school floor mops. People who habitually used them often got that mark. Janitors, Rook said. Or line cooks, the kid said. Back-of-house people, they shuffle swipe. He logged it. He logged everything. The file swelled and made a sound like its own heartbeat when he closed it. It was not enough, but it was more than the nothing he'd been eating for years. When reopening a case, you begin by breaking it slightly, reclassify evidence you thought was spent, rename things you named too early. He typed the request. He stamped the form. He wrote with a pen that bled, reopen request, Vega, Marisol Elena, 1976. Basis, new evidence film recovery, reflection analysis. The captain called him in. The captain had cheeks that the Florida sun had carved into riverbeds. You're sure, he said. I'm sure enough to be wrong differently, Rook said. That confidence. That humility. The captain leaned back and let his chair speak. You carrying anything from back then, Arthur? Rook watched the slat shadow of Venetian blinds make the captain into a barcode. "Just the usual," he said. "And Marisol?" "She's not the usual," Rook said. He didn't add, "She was 24, and the longer a person is gone the more their age refuses to change in your head." He didn't add, "I broke a promise I never said aloud." "Fine," the captain said. "You have 60 days of tolerance. After that it's headlines and favors. Keep it clean." "Clean," Rook repeated, as if the word hadn't degraded in the time between then and now. He went back to the motel the way a man returns to a dentist, aware of the necessary pain. The room was officially condemned, but unofficially open to the persistent. He stepped over a loose plank and into the cool of a place that hadn't been truly cool in decades. He stood where the photographer stood, angled the redeveloped images to the window, felt the exact moment when the framing clicked. The Polaroid had been taken from knee height, not eye. The person had crouched or knelt, as if looking up from a dropped thing. He crouched. He peered at the baseboard, loosened slightly at the corner. He pried it gently. Behind, the faint rub of old tape. Whatever had been hidden there had been removed long ago, but the outline of absence was its own document. On his way out, he stopped at the office that had once checked in travelers without looking properly at their faces. The counter bore cigarette burns like punctuation marks. A ledger still lay under a sheet of plastic, a fossil of commerce. He lifted it. Pages stuck and peeled apart like tired lips. August 1976 had a smeared block where 2B's entry should have been. Later months, October, showed a handwriting change. Someone else had taken over, someone who wrote the number 8 like a sideways infinity. He photocopied the pages and drove to the municipal hall under a sky that kept threatening rain without ever completing the thought. The clerk in records, a man who handled paper the way some men handle seedlings, retrieved the Sun-Ray's maintenance reports with a speed that made Rook suspect he had hoped for company. "The sign," the clerk said. "Yeah, October 3rd, 1976. Crack in segment 3, interference with current, replaced by Jack's neon. Owner signed off October 7th. Rook thanked him. On the way out, he saw a dusty corkboard advertising odd services and otter clubs. The Sea Grapes Diner had a smiling ad, its scallop logo identical to the matchbook. He stood there longer than the ad deserved, the kind of pause that isn't about the thing in front of you but the world behind it. By the time he returned to his desk, the case had already changed shape. The reflection, the crack, the cuff, none of it screamed. It spoke in the plain voice of logistics. Someone returned to the room after the official world had finished with it and took their own photographs. Someone with mop-scarred shoes and cuffed trousers that frayed in a particular way. Someone who knew the angles. He took the old statements out and arranged them on his desk like a tarot that refused mysticism. He made a column called Recheck and let his pen start making slow, deliberate ink. 3 investigator examines, past reports to identify overlooked details. He set the scene with paper. Rook had always believed that how you lay out a thing tells you what you think it means. He cleared his desk until it echoed with its own emptiness. Then he placed the reports in chronological order and pretended not to know what any of them said. The trick of reinvestigation is amnesia performed with discipline. You read to be surprised by what you already know and irritated by what you missed. The initial report, dated August 12, 1976, documented the call from the Sun-Ray's manager at 8:14 p.m. Found female guest unresponsive in room 2B, blood present. The manager, Victor Hale, 43 then, wrote that he had used the master key after a housekeeper reported no answer, strange smell. The housekeeper, Alma Torres, 19, seasonal, a cousin of someone's cousin. Rook underlined strange smell. In 1976, he had associated it with heat and the faint sugaring rot of spilled liquor. He had not asked Alma what she meant by strange. He saw his lack in the shape of the word he had never written. He phoned Tors now, a lifetime later. The line clicked to voicemail, then to a recording of a voice that had flattened itself into utility. He left a message that did not promise closure, only questions. He hung up and kept reading. Witness statements fanned out. Hale, the manager, who spoke as if his words wore ties. A married mechanic, Thomas Tommy Laird, who frequented Sea Grapes and answered in monosyllables. Professor Lionel Redfield, adjunct instructor of English, who structured his sentences with care even when he was ostensibly sad. A note in Rook's old handwriting beside Redfield's name read, "Attentive to language, maybe too attentive." That version of himself had been suspicious of grammar. There were photographs of the Sea Grapes diner staff. Marisol in her uniform, a white dress that made everyone look like a low-paid nurse, her hair tied in a red scarf, smiling in the way of people who dislike cameras but value the affection behind them. The back-of-house crew stood in another photo, less official. A fry cook named Ephraim, an older dishwasher known only as Pop, a janitor custodian whose name was written as J. Boone, with the question mark included. The question mark irritated Rook now. Why hadn't he followed it? He could see the younger him dismissing the janitor because janitors hovered at the edge of the official world like smudges. That was the kind of bias that cost people. He turned to the scene logs. Entry, August 13, follow-up August 14, second sweep. The second sweep was where the baseboard film had been found. Klein's notes were terse, hungover with clarity. Found film in baseboard void, too humid for on-site process. In 1976, the humidity had been an antagonist everyone forgave. Now it was a witness that had, against odds, preserved a fragment. Rook's pen migrated to the margin where he wrote small. Why would a student waitress carry a 110 film canister to a motel meeting? One answer, she wouldn't. Another answer, it wasn't hers. He pulled the report from the maintenance log that he'd photocopied. The neon crack, October 3rd. He matched it to the reflection in the redeveloped Polaroid. The reflection showed the crack. Therefore, the image was taken after October 3rd. Therefore, not on the night of the murder, but later. By whom? He wrote later by, in block letters on a sticky note, and stuck it to the photo's plastic sleeve like a provisional scar. The statements. He read them again with a slow spoon, as if tasting soup that might still burn. Victor Hale, manager. She was quiet, polite. Good tipper at the bar when she came in off shift. Why is the manager answering questions about a diner employee's tipping habits unless he's narrating the town to establish his own literacy in it? Hale had a wife who worked for the post office. He had access to master keys. He claimed he logged all entries, but the ledger shows a smear where 2B's entry should be. In Rook's old notes, ledger damaged by coffee spill. He wanted to call that neatness out now. He wrote coffee or removal. Tommy Laird, the mechanic. I barely knew her, he'd said then, jaws set like concrete. But he had called her Mari once in the interview, a slip Rook had missed the first time. Who uses a diminutive for a person they barely know. He wrote in the margin now, Mari familiarity. Laird's floor had the kind of mops that leave crescent scuffs. He wore cuffed jeans in every fold. Blue-collar cuffs fray differently, but fray they do. Rook circled it, then drew an arrow to nowhere. Professor Redfield. She was talented, he'd said, and disciplined. He had paused long enough to betray rehearsal. He had signed his statement in a hand that looked like a ladder. He had an alibi, faculty mixer, 4 colleagues, a laminated pass like a shield. Rook wrote nothing, only set the statement aside and put a book on top of it as if to test its weight. Alma Tors, the housekeeper, her original statement said, smelled like pennies and lemon cleaner, not good. At 19, she had the particular clarity of people who clean rooms for a living. Pennies, blood, Lemon cleaner. Someone had tried to subtract a thing and only added another. In 1976, Rook had filed that under normal. Now he wrote who cleaned and when. He played the old cassettes. The tape hissed like an old man clearing his throat. Rook listened to his own questions spoken by a younger voice. The tone was too firm, the silences too short. He heard himself interrupt. He heard Laird breathing through his nose, a homely detail that made him unexpectedly human. He heard Hale laugh once, a single syllable, when asked about the motel's reputation. The laugh was the sound of someone throttling something with their fingers. Redfield's voice was measured. He thanked Rook at the end, which nobody does who has been truly scalded by grief. He stopped the tape and wrote, "They're all performative, but performance leaves seams." From the property manifest, he noted small items retrieved and returned. A suitcase with no markings, a sweater with 3 missing buttons, a thin gold chain clasp broken, the glass paperweight never claimed. The chain bothered him. A broken clasp suggests removal against intention, but no ligature marks on the neck, no defensive scratches on hands, so the chain came off earlier or later or by someone careful. He read Marisol's background report again, as if it were a letter from a stranger that had been misdelivered. Born in Miami, moved with mother to Palmetto Key after father drowned in a boating incident when she was 8. Income: diner wages plus occasional tutoring, income in English at the community college. Dreams recorded without shame in a scholarship application found in her apartment. I want to write things that outlast heat. Rook placed the page near the photos and watched language and image blur without comfort. He shifted to the evidence photographs of the Sun-Ray office. There on the wall, a corkboard in 1976 had shown a faded flyer, JAX Neon, "We fix lights right." He followed his pen to the maintenance report dates from October. The JAX Neon technician had signed the form with a blunt, square name, D. Parr. He had never been interviewed. Why would he have been? It had been October, case already stale. But the redeveloped photograph with the cracked neon reflection meant the photographer had been in room 2B after the sign repair. Anyone who worked on the sign would have been in proximity. Rook wrote, "D. Parr, interview now." He reviewed the chain of custody on the Polaroid. It had passed through Hale's hands before Rook got it back in '76. Hale had said he found it on the floor near the window when he first entered with the master key. If he found it then before the crack in the sign, it could not have reflected the crack. Yet the redeveloped image did. 2 options. Hale lied about when he found it, or there were 2 Polaroids and one replaced the other. Rook let the logic grind without romance. Second option requires a replacement process. Someone enters after October, positions themselves near the window, takes a shot with significant glare, leaves the Polaroid where it will be refiled. Why? To insert evidence or to conceal it under too much shine. He read Alma's later addendum statement, filed a week after the initial chaos, and found one sentence that had not landed before. "When I walked in, the floor felt sticky but smelled like lemon. Mr. Hale said to step over and keep my shoes clean." Sticky lemon floors, mop users, crescent scuffs on shoes. He wrote a triangle, Hale, mop, Boone. Then he added Laird to another side. He drew a line through the shape not because it meant something yet, but because shapes sometimes call up their answers. He took out Marisol's notebook, bagged and returned to her mother in '77, copied then and filed pages of English quotes and Spanish scraps. The copy included a semi-legible half-page. "Don't go alone if the man says privacy is safety." The line had been underlined twice. The content could have been from a lecture, a flyer, a friend's warning. The handwriting in the underline was more hurried than her standard hand. Rook compared it to marginalia on an essay Redfield had returned. The slant was not the same. He circled nothing. He wrote instead, "She knew caution as a word, not as a force field." He mapped the timing. Hale calls at 8:14. Police arrive 8:22 p.m. Alma reports smell at 7:45 p.m. The medical examiner estimates time of death between 6:40 and 7:00. Between 7:00 and 7:45, someone cleaned. The someone had access to supplies, knowledge of the room's layout, a willingness to stay with a body long enough to mop. That someone either knew the victim or owed the manager a favor or both. He found in a corner of the file a photocopy of a small, forgettable receipt from a local hardware store. Neon sealant $2.09, baseboard nails $0.89. Dated October 2, signed by V.